Welcome back, everybody, to Tech Intel Tuesday right here on the Forward Observer channel. I'm Mike Shelby, a former intelligence NCO and contractor, and this is my weekly opportunity to hop on and talk about all things tactical intelligence. Now, you may have noticed that these episodes are not always published on Tuesdays, but I do try to get out a new video each week, regardless of when it gets published. So thanks for being here and for watching. This week, we're talking about intelligence and the OODA loop. Now, most of you are probably already familiar with OODA, so I'm going to go below surface level and talk about how it relates to intelligence. And by the end of this video, you're going to have an understanding of why the OODA loop is so important to intelligence operations. Now, chances are good that if you've taken even a basic tactical shooting course, then you've already been introduced to this concept called the OODA loop. OODA has been taught for decades. It's nothing new, so I'll spare you the details. But briefly, we are talking about OODA, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. That is the decision-making process described by Colonel John Boyd. And for us, that means we see something, we try to make sense of what we're seeing, we figure out what we need to do in response, and then we do it. So in short, if we can't observe, then we have nothing to orient to, nothing to decide on, and then also nothing to act on. Every piece of the OODA loop is critical, but our ability to observe is the most critical because that's what kicks off the whole thing. So let's say that you're driving on the interstate and you're scanning ahead on the road, you're going up this uphill slope, and you observe brake lights at the top of the hill. So we have just sensed a change in our operational environment that we need to respond to. So we orient ourselves to the change in the situation. Maybe there's a speed trap up ahead, a cop is sitting up at the top of the hill, and he's pinging drivers as they come over the hill. Or maybe there's some debris in the road, or there's a wreck. But regardless of what it is, we need to decide on what to do. Can we let our foot off the gas? Do we need to start braking? Do we need to slam on the brakes? Do we need to swerve off the road to avoid hitting the car in front of us? And then we act. We execute on whatever course of action that we decide to take. Observe, orient, decide, act. Now, there are a few important points to consider here that go beneath the surface level. And the first is how those OODA loops spin. Remember, in a period of competition or crisis or conflict, your OODA is spinning and so is your adversary's. And so if we can observe better than our enemy can and orient, decide, and act, then we have a strategic advantage because observe, again, is what kicks off this whole process. If we can observe and our enemy can't, we have the advantage. If you've ever seen or done close quarters combat drills or seen CQB combat footage, then you may have seen a flashbang get tossed into a room before that room is cleared. That's a little grenade that explodes and creates a concussive bang that's designed to temporarily stop a bad guy's OODA loop so he can't observe, orient, decide, and act, while we can do all those things. And so the enemy in that room is too busy turning away from the grenade to focus on what's coming through the door. So his OODA loop stops. We want our OODA to spin. We want our enemy's OODA to stop. It's really simple. So far, we've been talking about the OODA loop at the individual level, but it also applies to organizations, especially in warfighting. At the organizational level, the OODA loop describes intelligence and operations. Observe and orient is a function of intelligence, and then decide and act happens on the operations side. So let's focus on the OO of the OODA. This is what precedes deciding and acting. Observe is intelligence collection. That is our ability to gather information from a multitude of sources and sensors. If you lack those things, if you don't have sources or sensors out in your battle space or out in your community, then your collection is confined to your own line of sight, which is very narrow. In the Army, we said every soldier is a sensor, and every member of your neighborhood and broader community is also a sensor. So we need to be identifying and connecting those sensors to our efforts locally. And that's part of why I run a regional preparedness network, so that I can get all these people collecting information so that we can produce intelligence, so that we can drive good decisions and better operations. And then we have Orient, which is intelligence analysis. We need to understand analytic tradecraft so that we can make sense of all this incoming information. If you have sources and sensors out there, then you are going to get information that's good, bad, and ugly. And we have to be able to tell those things apart. We have to tell the difference between the three. And then we need to take that good information and multiply it. We have to produce intelligence that is greater than the sum of its parts. And one of the ways we do that is by finding patterns and associations that the enemy is trying to hide, because those things can be exploited. Remember that a targeting package contains intelligence that is developed on a target. Those targets are not going to come out and put a neon sign on top of their compound or on their vehicle. Almost always, we have to develop that ourselves. So think of it this way. You pull into a gas station, you swipe your card, you pull out the gas nozzle, and you start to fill your tank up with fuel. That's the information that's going to drive your operations, so it needs to be accurate. You need a fuel filter in there to filter out the bad particulates out of the fuel before it gets to your engine, because there is no better way to jam up an operational engine than by injecting bad fuel into it. That's why we need an intelligence analyst. That analyst is that fuel filter that keeps our engine running on timely, relevant, accurate, specific, and predictive or actionable intelligence. Also remember that everything we do in intelligence is to support the commander or the decision maker, because they're doing the deciding and then the action arms are doing the acting. Intelligence is a commander's eyes and ears on the battlefield so that he can see and understand the enemy situation, and then based on that understanding, conduct operations. So we want our OODA loop spinning better and faster than our enemies, and there are two key points here. First, everything starts with observe. If we're not observing, then our OODA loop isn't spinning because we can't act on what we don't see. And second, it doesn't matter how fast our OODA is spinning if we get the orient phase wrong. Because if we misorient to what we observe, then decide and act will suffer, and we'll just be making bad decisions, but faster. So if you want your OODA loop to spin faster, start by improving your observe and orient skills. Now, while our OODA loop is spinning, then we might consider disrupting our enemy's loop, because that means his decisions are slowed down. This is why we have things like disinformation and operations security and counterintelligence and military deception. We are attacking the enemy's OODA loop when we do or practice these things. All counterintelligence efforts attack either the observe or orient phase of the OODA, and I'll explain how. Now, one of two things can happen when you deliberately alter how the enemy sees the battlefield or the friendly situation. The first is that we force the enemy into making blind decisions when we deny him information through good OPSEC and through neutralizing his attempts to spy on us. If there is no observe, then there's nothing to orient to, and then decide and act become difficult, or in some cases impossible. And this is what happens when we attack the observe phase. The second thing that can happen is we lead him into making poor decisions based on false information. This is disinformation and deception. If I know the enemy is actively collecting on a particular topic or in this geographic area, then we're going to make available to him information that we want him to inject into his OODA loop. We're attacking the orient phase by helping him reach a false conclusion that we want him to reach, and then he's going to decide and act based on that faulty intelligence. So what does all this mean for us? It means that during a local or national emergency, whether that's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, the better you do at observe and orient, the better your outcomes can be, which also means that the opposite is true. The worse you do at observe and orient, the worse your outcomes will be. If you are interested in learning more about observe and orient, which is intelligence collection and intelligence analysis, then come on out to my next tactical intelligence course. I'll be at Darcy. That's the Direct Action Response Center in Little Rock, Arkansas, from the 16th of August to the 18th. That's 3 days of practical exercises on intelligence collection and production so that we can drive security operations. And you're going to come away with two key benefits. Number one, you're going to learn how to set up and run intelligence systems. We work our way through a fictional scenario in this course, which frankly might become a real-world scenario one day. And you're going to learn how to do it in practice so that you can go home and replicate what you learned, so that you can have an intelligence system of your own up and running during the next big emergency or disaster. And then the second is that my goal is to equip students to be an area intelligence officer. There are a lot of training courses out there, training people to be shooters, communicators, and medics. And all these people are going to need intelligence to drive their operations. In fact, all of these people could do their jobs better if they understood intelligence. And there's a really good chance that you're not only going to be a shooter, but you're also going to be a communicator and a medic. And we may as well just throw intelligence on there as well, because we need intelligence. When everyone understands intelligence, we can all drive the fight better. So, if you expect to decide and act during the next big emergency, and you want to learn how to observe and orient or improve those skills, then check out my course schedule at the link in the description, which is Gray Zone Store. That's gray with an A, grayzonestore.com. Thanks for watching this week's Tac Intel video. I'll be back next week with another one, so be sure to like and subscribe. Until then, be well and stay out front.